I think the first thing that I want to start with is what is SCBWI and why people should join. So tell us what it is, what are the benefits, and how does one join? And I'd like to start that with Patricia and Deborah. Do one of you want to jump in? Oh, let's all unmute ourselves so that you have, we shouldn't have much feedback if it's just the few of us. So Patricia or Deborah?
Well, I just want to say the thing that has kept me a volunteer with SBWI for over 30 years is that it's about writers and illustrators helping each other. It doesn't matter where you are on the ladder. If you're a newbie, if you're multi-published, somebody's helping you and you are helping someone else. And I think it's about as pure of an organization as you can get. There's definitely a learning curve to learning how to write for children. And that is their whole purpose, is to help everybody get to the point they need to get so that they can be published. It's an amazing thing. I think Deborah was going to talk a little bit about the benefits of the international organization, and then I'll come back and talk about the benefits of our local chapter.
Oh, okay, great. Thanks, Patricia. So so it is an international organization dedicated to helping authors and illustrators achieve their goals. And if you visit the main chapter website at scbwi.org, you'll find a wealth of resources. What's exciting right now in this virtual age is there are quite a few free events offered throughout the world that members can participate in. And I encourage you to attend those. There's also a publication called The Book, which is a very thick book that has lots of insight into how to break into the publishing market. And then, of course, we have things that Janice will talk later for published authors, and just a wealth of resources for people trying to get into the publication market.
Yeah, I love how at every stage you're at, there's something there for you. The book might tell you how to start writing, but if you're published, there's things like the book stop and birthday parties where you can help publicize your title as it comes out. And there's even discounts and stuff that you can get on different kinds of services, like if you want to buy Scribner or Publishers Weekly. And they advocate as a group for children's book publishers whenever something comes up legally or socially.
Right. I also wanted to add there are quite a few grant opportunities. There's a big push for diversity in the publishing world right now. So there are quite a few diversity grants offered from the main chapter. There's some from our chapter, and there's also some offered for other chapters as well that are open to members.
So how much does it cost to join?
It's $80. And I believe your second, when you renew, it's a little less. It's only the first time that it's that. But you more than make it up in discounts. For instance, our Summer Spectacular this summer, the first weekend in August, if you are a member, it's $100. And it's almost like going to the conference, except it's going to be all virtual. Amazing speakers. But if you're a non-member, it's $180. So by spending that $80, you're already ahead. And you get all the...
So Patricia seems to be frozen for a second, but I believe she was going to say you're going to get a lot of benefits. Do you want to, Deborah or Janice, do you want to jump in?
Oh, so for the benefits, for example, the San Diego chapter has monthly events. So if you're a member, you get discounts on that. You also get discounts now with everything going virtual. All the SCBWI events are virtual. So the membership transfers not just to the San Diego area, but to the international organization. So if you want to attend a virtual event in Hawaii, your membership gives you a discount there too.
Super. And I would say, I think too, one of the, besides the connections that are made, one of the main, a good benefit, not a main benefit, but a good benefit too, is the Golden Kite Book Award. And you have to be a member in order to be eligible for that award. So Deborah, what else about what are some other benefits?
Well,
I'm sorry. I was going to,
Janice?
we're going to need to clarify. So I will be saying last names.
Okay.
Deborah Schmidt versus Deborah Halverson. Deborah Halverson from the international national perspective. What are some other benefits?
I am an information gatherer, so I tend to hone in on the benefits that are the publications. You mentioned the Summer Spectacular coming up. Every summer I do a market report, and that is going to be offered as a written offering this summer for everyone to download who attends. And I talk about the state of the children's book publishing market, but I also talk about all the updates that I've made to a resource that is found in the book called the Survey of Publishers, the Market Survey of Children's Books Publishers. And it is basically a directory of all the people, of all the companies publishing. It describes their submission programs, and I track all the movements of the editors. It lists all the editors and their titles so that you know who's in which house and who you're sending to. And they update that twice a year, and it's available in the book. And that's what I am primarily responsible for, and I update each summer. And I did a special kind of edition of that, which is what the state of publishing was through the pandemic, which had a lot of unique factors to it and affected authors in a lot of ways. And that was put out in SCBWI's Bulletin, which is a quarterly publication, an e-newsletter, but they do monthly e-newsletters. And so you're always being informed. And as someone who sits at the intersection of the business and the creativity, I find those publications to be major benefits. And they are available wherever you are, whether you're in the 30 chapters that are outside of the United States.
So Janice, would you like to add to that?
I can say that Virginia and I right now are putting together programming for those who are the published and listed program folks, and those are the folks that have been traditionally published with different publishers, and we will be meeting on a monthly basis. And because we've got the virtual space available, some sessions will be to inspire, some will be to bring in speakers to talk about craft or to talk about publicity and getting books out and how do you deal with new media, et cetera, to outreach to others. We're conducting a survey now just to figure out what exactly the needs are for our PAL members. And that's something that I think the San Diego chapter has been really good at, and that's being responsive to those members within the San Diego community and addressing both craft, in terms of illustration technique, in terms of techniques for writing, but also industry and business and what do you need to publicize and where are the publishers and where do you find them. And I know what Patricia was going to address and kind of, she's not with us at the moment, probably struggling to come back in, but maybe Deborah could take up, is what does the season look like for the coming year? Because I think that will be really of interest for folks.
Sure. Yeah, we're working really hard behind the scenes to set up our season. So basically we have a monthly chapter meeting on the second Saturday of the month from 2 to 4 p.m. And that goes from September to April. And then in May, we have a one-day conference called Mayfest. So for the chapter meetings, what we're focusing on this year is bringing editors and agents from around the world to give a presentation from that 2 to 4 period time. And we're going to have 3 intensives, which will be craft focused, and those will be from 9 till noon on the second Saturday. So we're working behind the scenes on that. We do sell a season pass, so you get a discount on attending all of those events. For Mayfest, we'll have virtual critique, so you can sign up to get a 15-minute critique with an editor or an agent or an art director of your choice. I don't know if some of the people attending right now are illustrators, but we also have monthly schmooze events that are virtual where the illustrators get together and share tips and ideas. And Patricia's coming back on, so I'll let her also talk about in a second the class she teaches, but we also have critique groups that are virtual critique groups in all genres, so that's really an exciting thing. And we just heard news that the international chapter is going to offer additional critique group resources as well. Patricia, did you want to unmute and share about the writing class you teach?
Sorry, my Zoom cut out on me completely.
Sure.
We just teach a beginning writer's class, and it basically takes you from idea to having something ready to show an editor. So we go through the different things, plotting, character. We do a lot of critiquing in between there so that people are getting feedback on their work. And eventually we move on to marketing and query letters and cover letters and getting things ready. So somebody who's is mystified by the whole process of writing for kids hopefully you have a much better understanding when you're done with that.
Super. So just to recap, there's lots of privileges to being a member of SCBWI. You have access to workshops, networking. I mean, I remember SCBWI hosted Arthur Levine, who brought Harry Potter to the United States. You know, so there's lots of fun opportunities to mix and mingle with authors, editors, and agents. And also, you know, with the work that Deborah does, members will have access to, you know, what publishers want now, and being able to access those, you know, the editors and agents and et cetera in that way. And then Janice mentioned, you know, we also have opportunities for the published and listed folks as well that are geared toward, so there's basically benefits for all levels, for new writers and for the not so new writers. So it was the more established writers as well. So we've got everything for every type of writer out there. So you join, and then you'll have access to all these different opportunities. Okay, so one of the first questions I want to ask is, what are some myths and misconceptions about writing for children and young adults? Like, for example, so some things, I mean, I've got a ton of stories in my head, but what are some things that people come in and they think that this is what Kidlet's about and it's not? So why don't we start with Deborah Halverson.
Well, I think one of the challenges is that when people start in this business, they might not realize the competition and the level of craft you need to bring your work to. And so when they first come in, they know that they enjoy children's stories and they've got ideas for it. But this is where SCBWI is worth its weight in gold to new writers. It educates you on your craft and lifts you up so that you can compete with the people who are out on the store shelves. And you can learn how to hone the rhyme if you feel like rhyme is your thing to do. It's not just coming up with a clever rhyme, but turning it into a story arc. And I think that's probably one of the most common misconceptions, is it's pretty easy to do and get published. And you quickly find out that's not the case, but then you get the tools to now address that.
I also think, just to piggyback off that too, another misconception is rhyming is not easy. I mean, I know everyone can rhyme, but rhyming for publication in the children's book world is not easy. So anyway, so we'll go to Deborah Schmidt.
Go ahead.
Oh, so I would like to add that some common misconception is, to piggyback on that, that picture books are easy. So not 80% of our members are writing picture books, I think, because they're easy. And most first-time picture book authors will contact us and say, well, I've written a picture book and can you help me get my illustrator? Or can I ask my friend to illustrate it? So that's something done by the publisher. They pair the best author with the best illustrator. And so that's a very common misconception.
Sure. Patricia?
I was going to say the exact same thing Deborah did. You definitely do not want to get your cousin or next door neighbor to illustrate your book. Just my case in particular, having Floyd Cooper, who people collect, as my debut novel illustrator. I'm going to sell more books because of that.
Sure. Well, and I also think what's tricky about picture books too is that you kind of have to, the illustrator is half the creator of the book.
Yes.
And so when you're writing, you have to, because as picture book writers, you know, we only have 1,000 words to develop plot and character. So you have to kind of share that space with the illustrator, because the illustrator can really help you tell the story. Mm-hmm. And you know, so it's a trick. And so part of that is big advice to folks that want to write picture books and that think it's easy: read a lot of picture books, and you're going to look and flip the pages, and you can't have 5 pages in the kitchen. So, you know, just pay attention to how the story is being told, not just by the words, but by the illustrations. And you also have to, I think, both piggybacking off what Deborah and Patricia said, you got to let it go. Unless you yourself are an author illustrator, leave that to the publishing house to take care of the illustrations. And I've been thrilled with how Sleepy Bear has chosen my illustrators, and I've been off every single time. And the end result, because they know what they're doing, the end result is so much better than I ever thought it would be. Janice, what about you? What are some myths and misconceptions?
I think you guys have kind of hit it in terms of thinking that writing for kids is easy. I mean, I have been published many times in academic journals. I would write it, I would have somebody else review it, I would edit it, and I would send it off and it would be published. I am on my 25th revision of a picture book. And it's, under 500 words is really what publishers are looking for, because folks are reading many books to their kids at night and they don't want to read for 4 hours. So it's very difficult to get the stories down, and it's really important the words that you pick. Even if you're writing young adult, kids do not have the patience that an adult does for long, descriptive, run-on, flashbacks. Adults will forgive a lot of stuff and kids will not. So it's a really tight craft. And what you read as a kid growing up isn't what kids are reading today. So you can't write your favorite story that was like Little House on the Prairie, because that's not what somebody's going to read. So I think, it's a huge learning curve, well worth it, but it's a difficult. It's not, I'll write this because it's easy and it's short.
Sure. I also think like adults have, I know my attention span is not, it's not good, and I feel like the older I get, the less I have. But my even when I'm reading out loud my own book, I'm reading aloud my own book at events, and I'm like, oh my God, like, when is this over? And it's like 1,000 words. Like, no, it's not a lot, but even I'm like, oh God, okay, let's get to the end. Can I skip some pages here? So yeah, like, it's really, there's an art to being able to tell a whole story without, with a limited amount of words. And yeah, so.
Virginia,
go ahead, Janice.
Can I also just chime in to say that used to be the publishing houses published children's book as sort of a good feeling part of their industry. Harry Potter changed all that. Children's publishing is a business, and it's looking to make money. And it's one of the reasons that they want to pair the illustrator with the author, because, for example, Patricia's book that's coming out, Patricia does not have a well-known name right now in the industry. She will, but she doesn't right now. But her illustrator has a known name. So that book is going to sell. And then Patricia will gain her name, and then they'll pair her with another illustrator who may be newer, and then that illustrator will sell. So there's a lot that goes into the business. So knowing both craft as well as the business itself is really, really helpful for positioning yourself if you want to do this work.
Absolutely. Okay, so what is different about writing for children versus writing for adults? Perhaps we'll start with Debra Schmidt.
Well, I think the main thing that I've heard over the years is you really have to trust your reader. One mistake I see some writers do is they overwrite, or they don't trust the intelligence and the savvy of their young readers. And so the young readers they're smart. They know what's going on, and it's important to, as you are writing, to really respect the intelligence and the emotional intelligence of your readers as well.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Patricia, do you?
I have a couple of tips that I give in my class. I would love to just quickly go through it.
Sure.
And we call it the rules of writing for kids. The kid must solve the problem. Mm-hmm. It usually is a short time span or one main problem. The writing has to be very active, so it's very much show, not tell. The situation the kid is in must be age appropriate to whatever genre, from board books up to young adult books. Kids hate preachiness, which is, I think, a little bit about what Deborah was saying there. In the minute that happens, they're out of the book. You need to get to the story pretty fast. They're used to these. If you've watched Saturday Night morning cartoons in the last 2 years, they are very different from what we grew up with. And so it has to get quickly to it. And picture books, they really want them to be under 1,000 words. They'd rather they be 500 to 600 words. Kids like twists and they like humor. So those are always going to be selling. Those books will sell very well. And then just spend some time with kids and know how they actually talk. Teenagers never finish sentences. So I know that Deborah has a couple, 3 teens, and she probably knows how to write for teens very well.
3 15 boys. It keeps me on my toes.
Yeah, Deborah's got triplets, which I don't know how you're like awake right now, but
It's easy now.
so those are, Patricia, those are great tips for writing for Kidlet. Deborah Halverson. So can you go back and answer the question, like how is writing for children different from writing for adults?
That was a great list, Patricia. How is it different from writing for adults? One of the biggest challenges that I get when working with novelists who are new to writing, particularly middle grade books, especially middle grade novels, is that they want to do all the story setup, and an adult book will let you have that time to do it. And Patricia touched on that. And so I try to coach them that you want to start with some moment of action that reveals your character, and then get in there with his friends. Don't go home, don't have them wake up, go home with dinner, and we find out what their parents are like. In most books, you don't need all of that. The young people, you want to get in there with their friends, and it doesn't have to be an explosion. It may be as simple as your characters climbing up on the roof to get a cat down. It's action, it reveals the character. We can find out about the setting through that. So you can accomplish all those backstory and setup goals that you might have more time to do in a novel for adults, but you can do it within the context of action, featuring a young person, probably interacting with a young person at that time.
Great. So Janice, what are some differences of writing for children versus writing for adults?
I think people have covered quite a few of them. And I really want to second what Deborah was saying about leaving the space for the child, that you don't need to do, if you tell somebody they opened the door, then they walked in, and then they put their book bag on the floor, and they blah, 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 blah. All you have to do is say they walked in the house, hey mom, where are you? And the reader will fill in all the rest of that, and they will create a context, and they will create an emotion response that brings them into the book and makes the book live. And that, I think, is something really important to bear in mind. I also think...
I'm sorry. Oh, wait.
No, go on.
Well, it just builds on what you said. And that's one of the most amazing things about picture books, is that space you give them. You don't have to, when the page turns, a child goes there with you and they're immediately in the new scene. A page turn takes them there. Their imagination is so amazing. You don't have to have those transitions, the opening the doors or saying the next day at school. You just turn the page and it's the next day at school. So the page, when you're telling stories for children, especially within children's books, picture books, you have the extra aid of that device that is the page turn. And I love that.
And for picture books, if you're writing picture books, you want to leave room for the illustration and the illustrator. So you don't need to say, he wore a red hat and the blue sail on the boat and the way the wind blew, etc. The illustrator is going to create that. And the illustrator will create a world, and oftentimes beyond what you imagined. So you write a story that's just sort of a beginning, the child wakes up in the day and then they go, or maybe a change of the seasons, they wake up and then they go through the seasons. And the illustrator makes them go on a train ride. And then you have all the fun of the train ride in addition to the story you've told. So you have to leave the room for the child's imagination and for the illustration. And I want to just say something about rhyme, because we talked a little bit about rhyme. And rhyme is kids love it because they can do that anticipation, like Deborah says with the page turn. And then you turn the page. Woo, we're in a different world, That's not a towel. No, it's my flying cape, as you do your page turn. But that can be done in prose. That doesn't have to be done in rhyme. And good rhyme is really helpful, and it brings a child, and they know when they turn the page, because it rhymed with dog, it's going to be a frog, and that brings that excitement and anticipation. But if it's not done well, it's not done well, and it all falls apart. And if you twist the story to make it rhyme, what you get is a very Dr. Seussish kind of runaway, vivid thing, and not necessarily your story with your beginning, your middle, and your end. And
Sure.
with kids' stories, what you often do is you do a setup where the kids want something and they try to get it, it doesn't work. And it makes it worse. And then they try something else and it gets worse and it gets worse and it gets worse. And I think some of the most successful writers are those that have put their kids in really bad situations. You know, they borrowed, who is it? Bruce Covell talks about borrowing his mom's yearbook to bring it to school. Well, that's not a big deal. But then, you know, it rains and then it falls in the mud and then, you know, just make the situation worse and worse and worse and worse. And that's what carries your reader along in your story.
I think in general, this is just a good writing tip for regardless of whether you're writing for Kidlet or adults, but it's like stay true to your story and tell a good story. And if you're using rhyme, if you're not good at it, then what happens is you end up limiting your story because you're trapped by the rhyme and not really telling the good story. But play around. I mean, I think that's the biggest, like play around, see where it goes. And sometimes I've written stuff where, you know, it turns out I'm not writing a picture book. It turns out that it's better as a novel. And then sometimes I'm like, ooh, this might be more of an adult. And I mean, frankly, it's like you can cuss with adults, right? You can cuss in adult books. You can, you know, you can get into love affairs. You can get, there's like some certain topics that are different that we wouldn't write about in children's book that we could write about in adults. But this is why I love children's books, because I know in some ways writing for adults gives you more freedom. I mean, I say that and knowing that we need to deconstruct that comment a lot, but you know, but what I love about writing for children is that these children's books get reread over and over again. You don't reread an adult book. I'm an avid reader, and once I read an adult book, that's it. I'm not rereading it, but I will reread a kid's book. And on top of that, like what happens with kids' books is they're still alive 20 years later. You know, like when you read them as a kid and then you're going to read them to your kids and et cetera. So kids' books, there's a magic to kids' books that's different from, I think, adult books. But, you know, of course, writing for adults too is also a challenge and a wonder, and there's amazing things with that too. But I think that there's something magical about writing for kids.
Can
Okay,
I just tag on to what?
Okay.
Can I just tag on to what you just said, Virginia?
sure, Deborah, go. Schmidt.
So we talked about rhyme, but we didn't really talk about rhythm. And a lot of picture books are read over and over because of the soft rhythm or the fast rhythm. And one technique a lot of authors use is they'll read a book and then they'll type it out or they'll write it out longhand to get the rhythm of so they'll pick a mentor text. If they're a picture book, they'll pick a couple of picture books that they want to read, not to copy, but to kind of get the rhythm and the flow of the words. And the rhythm changes if you're writing a picture book, mid-grade, YA, there's a different rhythm. So they'll often type it out by hand or write it out by hand to kind of internalize the rhythm of that genre.
Sure. Patricia?
I just want to say one other way that children's books differ from adult books is that in the business world, some publishers will still look at your manuscripts even if you don't have an agent. It's getting smaller and smaller. When I first started doing this, it was at least 50%, and now it's down below that. But I have met people who have 2 or 3 books and they do not have an agent. So there's still that opportunity to bypass the agenting process, which you would not get in an adult world.
So I want to address, I want us to talk about one other question, and then I want to take some audience questions. But what are some of the biggest mistakes that new Kidlet writers make? I mean, as in SCBWI, we work with new writers and established writers, but what are some mistakes that new Kidlet writers make? We'll start with Janice.
I think the biggest mistake people is that the kid doesn't solve the problem. That the kid is suffering and then the mom steps in or a friend steps in. And then another mistake is just to be having a moral, demonstrating, you know, a lecture. If you want a kid to learn something, you have to do it very, very subtly. It's so that they come along and it's their aha epiphany. It's not you beating them over the head with, this is the way, we are all good. We are all different, but we are all the same and we all love each other. That does not go in a kid's world.
I think that's kind of, I think one of the big things I hear too is people say stuff like, you know, I want to write kidlets because I want to teach this lesson. And it's like, well, you're not writing kidlets then. Because like that's one of, I think, the cardinal rules is like not to be didactic. And it's just like, I mean, if you think about adults, it's like how, I mean, I know, you know, with my husband, whom I love dearly, but if my husband tries to teach me something, I'm not listening. You know, so it's the same, I think it's the same type of thing. Like none of us want to be taught. But, you know, I think story is a powerful tool to learn. But, you know, none of us want to have it beat over our heads. Deborah Halverson, so what about you? What are the biggest mistakes that you think new Kidlet writers make?
I find two kind of rise to the top as you ask that question. And one often with picture books is they can be too narrative, too much of the more traditional telling of a story about a boy maybe who goes through his day and these are the things, and it's a story of friendship, and he tells about a friend who doesn't share a ball and then they work out how to share a ball, and it ends up being a lovely story, but it's too narrative, whereas the picture book market right now, and children in general with their great imaginations, you can elevate it to another level. So that story about friendship can be about maybe a bag of popcorn. You know, I've made this bag of popcorn, my friend, and you know, you focus on that, and kids learn from that as he interacts with that's just a silly thing, but something that's not a straight narrative story that doesn't have enough of a concept to it, that doesn't elevate the imagination of the child. So we get the emotional punch, but publishers are looking for something that can offer something a little more that embraces young children's imaginations. And that would also jump in there with what the other common problem I get with writers new to children's books is that their story is kind of quiet. Again, it's a lovely story. Maybe they've done their work to elevate it so that it's not a very narrative kind of story, but it just doesn't have enough punch, and that's something that I have to work with illustrators trying to find what can make this special, and that is a conceptual thing. And we can, you know, look at what happened with Harry Potter, where we had a school. You want to show kids in a school situation, but just a regular school, we've seen it, we've done it before. All of a sudden she sets it in a school for wizards and we've got something very different, and we've got that concept. And so trying to elevate people to take what they want, it's a story they want to tell, and find a concept that can stand out in the marketplace so they can have their publication career.
So I know we've talked a lot about picture books, which is fine, but Deborah, you're really more of an expert on the young adults. Can you give us, like, what are some mistakes that, because I'm sure we might have some YA folks out there, what are mistakes that new YA folks make? A common one.
Is that for me or that's
Deborah Halverson, sorry.
We've actually hit on a lot of them, not empowering the young person to fix their story. Often the character in someone new to writing middle grade or young adult fiction, the character will go through this great adventure, but they are a camera for the readers. They're too passive as everyone does things for them. Maybe their friend will pull them out of the room to tell them a secret. And we need them to push the friend out of the room. We need the protagonist to be the most active one. And I find too often they are moved about physically by other people. Actions are done to them. And readers want to see these books. They're looking for their own experiences in their books. They want to understand the world through these books. And so they want to live it from the safe space of their reading nook in their bedroom, but have all this adventure. And so you really need to empower the character. And so I will often counsel people to take them, to put the actions on the protagonist, and don't be afraid to make them unlikable. We're worried about that too much, and we give the best lines to the best friend and to the supporting cast. You know, empower your protagonist. That's why kids read YA fiction and middle grade fiction. Otherwise, they can go read a grown-up book that's really great and a lot of fun.
Well, and I also think that there's, like, right now we're in the age of the anti-hero, right? I mean, Breaking Bad and all these shows that have the anti-hero. So I think the unlikable characters are frankly a little more interesting sometimes.
And it's not necessarily that they're unlikable. They're interesting and they're real. People make mistakes and you make judgments, and part of the journey is these characters, these young characters are taking one step forward in their maturation, just like any of the actual readers. And to see them mess up and to have their very strong opinions, because young people are very strongly opinionated, and that's fabulous. They need to learn that if there's a mistake made, you can fix it, or here's how you would go about fixing it. But that makes the characters real, and you can root for them and worry for them, and that's what they want from their books. They can see people like them in there and get in there with them.
Sure. All right, Patricia. So what are some mistakes new Kidlit authors make?
I see a lot of people chasing trends. If vampire books are big, oh, let's write a vampire book, rather than something that's from their heart, because it's going to take 2 to 3 years to get that book out on the shelf, and by then the trend might be gone. Also, by that time, people have written some definitive works, say, about vampires or goblins or whatever, and yours pales in comparison. I can just take my own story. Everybody kept saying, write the story only you can write, and that actually worked for me.
Well, I don't know if people know, but have we mentioned the pipeline for the production schedule for a book takes several years to make. And so if you're chasing those trends, the trend will be done, or plenty will have been thrown at it by the time you're ready. So we come back to Patricia's advice.
Deborah, Schmidt.
So I would like to share, I think a lot of new writers make mistakes by not really understanding the submission process, and by submitting too early before their piece is really polished, which is why I think critique groups are so important, because the quality, the caliber of the writing has to be really high. You're competing against all the other authors in your genre. And that's why coming to some of our events that we have at the San Diego chapter or international chapter, where you get to see the editors and agents talk about what they're interested in, finding out whether they're open to submissions or not open to submissions. And one of the benefits of attending events is usually that that editor or agent will open, even if they're closed to submissions, they'll be open to the people attending the event. So I think that's super important. And along those lines, as you're writing, one thing I've noticed is a lot of new writers, they often think, well, I have to submit my first chapter, my first 3 chapters, and I'll spend months and months polishing the first few chapters, but then run out of steam and not get the whole book finished. And Richard Peck, a famous author, said the first chapter is the last chapter in disguise. So, you know, write a good first chapter, but keep going through and finish your project.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm very guilty of that, as Janice knows. Deborah Halverson, did you want to add something?
I was going to add that the first SCBWI event that I spoke at was in, it was a month after 9/11, and I was asked to step in, and Richard Peck was a speaker there. And I remember him talking about the first chapter. And he said when he was all done, he would go back and just not even reread the first chapter. He would just throw it out and start over. And that's one of the amazing things about SCBWI. No matter what level you're at, you'll be there for that moment when someone says something that sticks with you. Mm-hmm. You may have been writing middle grade or YA for a long time, and someone says the right thing at the right time, and your light bulb goes off, or it speaks to you and you carry it with you for 20 years now for me. And so I still go to the chapter meetings that you all pull together. You're amazing with the speakers that you bring and the programming that you put together to aid the attendees. And I still go, and I always leave with more things in my notebook. Every single time I am energized, I am questioning in the best way what I've written. So these chapter meetings are so invaluable as much as the national one is. And then you make the connections with the people in the room. And so you all put together great programming to make that happen.
Thank you.
Absolutely. And just speaking to what Deborah was saying, and what both Debras were saying is, one, you need to finish your project, and then you need to revise and revise and revise, because children's is so demanding, you cannot just do it on a one through. And it's really helpful to link up with a critique group, people, your peers, people who will tell you, you know, where they understand something, where they don't understand something, where what's happening doesn't sound true to your character, doesn't sound like a real person talking. Those critique groups, and that's something that SCBWI offers, and they're free. They're invaluable. They really, really are. And that's why I laughed at Virginia with all her multiple projects that get beautiful part way and then just sort of fall off the cliff, because I've been in a critique group with Virginia. So we've both seen where each other struggle. And after a while, your critique group partners sit on your shoulder and they tell you, this isn't going to work. You better rewrite that piece.
So just to, and this is something that I keep in mind too, as you know, writers, is my thing is I work on deadlines. So it's like I get attracted by shiny projects. So when I'll get started on something, and then if I get a contract or a deadline, it's like, then I stop and do that. And then, you know, then it's just, yeah, then I get in the circle where then the projects that I have been working on get pushed aside and held, and I don't do anything about it. So but getting into, you know, having the devil on your shoulder is important, and having that critique group to help you change, grow, and push you, I think, is really important. So I wanted to, because we're almost closing in, so I want to have one comment about this question and then move on to some audience questions. I would say, like, one of the things that I think that, and I mentioned this in the last discussion panel, but one of the mistakes that I think new writers make is you have to read. And if you don't read in your genre, then you have no business writing in it. So you have to read. If you want to write Kidlet in a specific genre, then you need to read that. And you can't just say, I've read Dr. Seuss, so therefore I know how to write children's books. You have to dig in and read all the books and authors and illustrators, and, you know, dig into your whatever field that you want to be in. So that's really important. Okay, so some audience questions. Go ahead, Janice, but I'm watching time and I want to get to the audience questions.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to piggyback to say, read in your genre, but read recent material. Don't read what was written 20 years ago, because that's not what's being published today.
Absolutely. And it's also not what our kids want to read.
Can I say one more thing?
Sure.
Okay, sorry, I know you're trying to get to those audience questions, but I just want to make sure that if somebody's watching this and they say, wow, SCBWI would be great for me to get involved with, there are so many ways to get in touch with us. You flashed up the website and our email address. You can email us and say, I want to be on your email blasts that we send out. If you are a member of the international organization, you automatically get our newsletter as well as the international newsletter. We have a Facebook page and we have a Twitter page. So just look for San Diego SCBWI and you will find us all over the place. And that way you can know what our programming is going to be and when you want to be there.
So we'll have Michaela and Haley, who are wonderful stage managers and doing all the back end work. They'll add the information to the comments, but it's really, if you look up SCBWI San Diego, things pop up. So make sure you join, you get a lot of good stuff. Okay. So let's go to some of these audience questions. So we have Marjorie. Her question is, I am collaborating with an illustrator on my current project who has contributed to my storyline with incredible concepts. Question, if the publisher wants a different one, is there a way to still include my artist, and what would that position be called? I am a new writer and enjoy my collaboration with my artist. He is part of my backstory as well. Thank you for any insight on this matter. I have a response, but did somebody else want to respond?
I would think that sounds like a co-writer at that point, or co-author, excuse me.
That's what I was going to say. Yeah, it might be that you can have two co-authors. I've got several co-authored books, so it could be a co-authored book, and then, you know, you can try to say to your publisher, you know, like, I've got an illustrator in mind, but I would never have that be a condition. And honestly, I mean, I know this is hard, especially for new writers. It was for me to think about it, but honestly, like, the publishing house knows what they're doing. And the books, the illustrators that they pick are really a good match for the book. And I have been delighted by the choices that my my publishing house has made. So just kind of work with that. But it does, I agree with Deborah. It sounds like in your case that you might want to think about having your collaborator be the co-author, especially if they helped shape the story, and then open up, allow the publishing house to work with you on art direction. Okay, the other question from Michaela. Oh, I'm sorry. This is, again, from Marjorie. If you have already collaborated with an illustrator prior to the publisher picking one for you, is there a way to still include the initial illustrator, and what would that position be called? Okay, so we've already talked, I believe those two are the same question. So we've already talked about that. That would be more of a co-writer collaboration. And then there's another question here about, is there specific recommendations on writing a query letter for a concert board book? So I know what a board book is. What is a concert book? But concept. I bet you that's what it is.
I was thinking.
I think it's important to note that most board books, like this one, are done in-house. One of the few people I know that isn't in-house that does it is our own Selena Yoon. But they're such light on text that they're almost always done by a packager. You can approach a packager and say, I'm interested in writing these.
And one other factor with board books is they're very cheaply priced. The profit margin on them are very slim. And that's another reason why the publisher will generate the ideas from within and get someone to come in and create it. So it's not the place of the most opportunity for debut creators, especially as an illustrator, to be honest.
Sure.
I'd just like to add on, I typed in Selena Yoon's name, and she spoke to our group. She was an art designer prior to publishing all her books, but the sample she showed us that she sent in is really a completed board book. So if you were to pursue that, your product that you sent in basically needs to be a functioning book if it's that type of a board book to really get published. So they really see what you have in mind.
And I think Deborah Halverson's point too is like, it's probably not the venue for a debut author in terms of write a book. And then a lot of what happens is, like, for example, there's conversation about whether or not my book is going to be a board book. So it's like, what happens is they take books and then you can turn them into board books. So write books. And then, then there's lots of, like, the same thing about writing. The advice I got in terms of writing for movies and stuff is write a book and then have the book be turned into a movie. Don't necessarily write for the movie. So, there's ways of working that. Janice, did you want to say something? I see you itching. No? Okay. Oh, what? Oh, you just.
I was just playing with my mic. Sorry.
Okay. So here's one more question. Do any of you teach classes in the creation of children's books here in San Diego? Yes. So I know, Patricia, do you want to talk about the classes?
Yes, this is a class we taught when we met at USD through their extension. Janice and I taught it together. And now we meet at UCSD. Our class is no longer affiliated with the university, so there's no credit. But the idea is that you meet for 2 hours before our regular chapter meetings. And again, we take you from soup to nuts. You have an idea, and hopefully by the end of the meetings, you meet once a month. You are ready to send something in, and we hopefully teach you all the basics along the way to do that. And it's even easier this year because we will be completely online. We usually start that in October. So if you somehow get in and get on our mailing list and everything for before September, we will definitely send you all the information on how to get involved in that class, or you can look on our website.
Do any of you, anybody else teach classes?
Well, I know you do, Virginia.
San Diego State, but not for writing. I used to. And then frankly, and again, Janice is probably going to laugh at me. Well, both Janice and Deborah, since they know me, but like, they're laugh at me. Like, I used to, but then, I also am doing 5,000 different things at once. So that's one of the things that I had to drop because I wasn't writing. And I think that, actually, I'm going to say that. I think that's actually important too. It's like when all these things are fun to do, and then you end up, they take away from your time to write. So you also have to guard your time, when you're saying yes to things. Like I think sometimes we have to say no just because you do want to put time to write. But yeah, there's lots of opportunities. The UCSD has that certificate program. USD has a certificate program, I don't know if it's a certificate program, but it's a Kidlet writing opportunity. So there's lots of different opportunities out there. And San Diego Writers Inc.
Yeah,
I think they do some classes.
The extended studies through UCSD is the one that I'm on the advisory board for, and it's online, so you can do it right now during this challenging time of ours from home. So that's another option.
But I think I also want to say, like, the classes, taking these certificate classes are great, but also joining SCBWI and joining the critique group, that's actually how I started. So I didn't take a class, I went through the process, and the critique group is really where I learned a lot about writing. So you can also just join SCBWI and get connected and work on your craft that way too. So I noticed Jennifer's here, so that's our time to wrap up, but you guys did such a fabulous job. Thank you so much for being here. And if anybody else out in the audience, if you have any questions about writing Kidlet and you want to explore writing Kidlet, this is the organization to be a part of, and these are the leaders. So make sure that you take advantage of this. Like I said before, the San Diego SCBWI chapter is the most active in the country. So wow. That's you have hometown advantage.